Welcome to the Cosmic Business Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Pallas, and this podcast is for soulful entrepreneurs who want to harness the cosmic power of astrology to elevate their message, unlock flow, and attract their best clients ever. Join me every week and get excited to discover how you can use the energy of the cosmos to get the business breakthrough you've been waiting for. Welcome back to another episode of the Cosmic Business Breakthrough. I am really excited to introduce you to today's guest, Jazze Jervis. Jazze is a corporate lawyer turned seven-figure business coach and network marketing mentor. She's a top podcast host, Iron Woman athlete, ex-competitive basketballer, and the hype girl for female entrepreneurs leaving their stories at the door and claiming their badass dream life. What I love about Jazze is that it's her mission to support high-achieving female entrepreneurs to lead with impact, value, and strategy while creating generational wealth for their families. She believes we are here to play big, take up space, and not be confined by the boxes society can put us in. Not only that, but she loves working with astrology and human design in her business for more alignment and greater business success. And that's why I wanted to have Jazze on the show to walk us through her experience of before astrology and human design and after astrology and human design, and how her business really shifted into this more authentic, more aligned version. We also are going to talk through Jazze's Saturn Return, which is a huge transit for anybody to navigate, but particularly to navigate your Saturn Return as you are running your own online business is quite a feat. So listen up, get comfy. This is going to be such an epic conversation.
So tell me a little bit about how it all got started for you and, of course, how you first found your way into working with astrology and human design.
For me, I very much feel like there is kind of like pre-astrology and human design and then post, astrology and human design. It's like this is how things were done before and this is how things are done now because, I am the kind of person who is going to create results in my life. I am very dedicated. I've got a very strong work ethic. I am, Cancerian sun, Capricorn rising, the two sort of CEO signs of the zodiac. I just know that about me. I'm a manifesting generator in human design. The things that I put my mind to, I'm most likely going to be okay at, right? And so for me, at the start, the first couple of years of my business, I created a lot of results and really quickly. And it wasn't until we had our first $1 million cash year that I had this moment of, is this meant to feel like this? I don't know that this is meant to feel as hard or as unfulfilling as it does. I just had this moment where I was like, this is something I've been working towards, having this our first $1 million year, and it doesn't feel as exciting as it should. And so I had this moment where I kind of felt like everything sort of came crumbling down a little bit. And I really started to realize that what I was creating, although I was having a lot of impact with the people that I was working with, and it wasn't like I didn't enjoy my business, I was just building something that was totally out of alignment for me as a person. I had one core offer, I was launching in one particular way, in the same way every time. And, looking at my business now, I've got 4 live programs that someone could join at any one time. I launch differently every time. I've built out a team. I've really built something that is sustainable for me, and at the time when I was building my business, I was just following the advice from the mentors that I was working with, build one offer, build that out really well, become known for something, make sure you just, stick with this. You don't need to create anything else. If you do this really well, that's how you run a successful business. And that's just not a match for me as a person. It's not a match for, my human design, my astrology. And so I kind of had this moment where I was like, well, I've achieved this kind of goal that I've been working towards. It doesn't feel like it should feel like. I have success on paper, but it doesn't feel like enriching success. And that is when I really started on the path of, I guess, self-discovery and self-exploration, and started really sort of like sitting with my emotions, sitting with my feelings, and exploring like lots of different modalities like astrology and human design, energy healing, kinesiology, like all of these different kind of modalities to support me to, I guess, stop numbing. I was just one thing after another on this like hamster wheel, on this rat race, just continuously working hard and working towards my goals and achieving them. And because I was achieving, I didn't see any reason to stop. And I'm really, really sort of glad that I had that moment to then, really sort of commit myself to building something that felt like it was desire-led and strengths-led. And through that, something that feels so much more sustainable. So that's kind of what really led me to astrology and human design, among other modalities, was, achieving really great milestones in my business, but not feeling totally enriched or fulfilled.
Yes, that is so interesting, because I know a little bit about your chart, and you have this really strong individualist streak in there. So this is such a signature of somebody who can't just follow somebody else's path or somebody else's blueprint or somebody else's formula. You have to actually be able to do it in your own way in order to feel good about it, because otherwise you're always going to feel boxed in. Like that's a lot of your astrological energy is about, doing things differently, doing things in a very individualist way. That's sort of super unique to you. So I love that you have created now this business that, doesn't fit the mold, that is still super successful. And I would love to know a little bit about how you navigated that shift. Like once you realized that things weren't aligning for you anymore, what was your next step? How did you make that transition, I guess, to have this business that now operates in the way that you wanted to, rather than the way somebody else told you it should be done?
So I guess my first step, so at the time we had created really successful business with me and a VA. The first big step for me was shifting that, because I think part of the reason why I was, sort of afraid to do the self-exploration work is because I was wearing all of the hats, and the only, I had created safety around a lot of doing, like creating my results from doing and from taking action was safe for me. Creating results in a way that was more easeful was not safe. Like that is not something that my nervous system was accustomed to, used to, had even experienced. And so for me, I knew that having someone that could support me in my business in more of a, managerial role in the form of an online business manager was going to be a really important move for me. And it's interesting because, she, beautiful Hayley, who I've worked with for a couple of years now, she is also a manifesting generator. And so having someone that can move at the same pace as me has been totally game changer for my business and for me as a person. That was my first step. Was I knew I needed more support in my business to be able to free up some brain space and some energetic space in my body to actually do the healing work and to do the self-exploration work. And from there, I'm someone that has consistently invested in mentorship. And I just decided that I was no longer going to invest in a mentor or a coach who was just sort of like, I can help you with the marketing, or I can help you with this thing. It was, I want someone who is just as dedicated as I am to building something that is really unique to me and can help me sort of excavate that and explore that, because I knew that what I was doing wasn't right, but I also didn't know what was right. I didn't really understand a lot of these parts of myself. I knew that I was someone that was going to get results, but, I didn't know my communication style. I didn't know my human design. I didn't have much idea about my astrology apart from, reading my horoscopes in like Dolly magazine when I was young. That was kind of the extent of my astrological knowledge. And so I didn't really know where to start. So for me, as someone who really does, I love mentorship. I think there's so much value in that. I just said to myself, you need to make a decision and work with mentors that are a real values match and have the same sort of like ethos, I guess, in terms of building something that is unique to me. And so that was my first step before sort of changing lots of offers, changing, anything sort of drastically in my business. It was hiring someone to support me so I could free up some space to even have time to explore. And then the mentors that I was working with, I just expressed, this is what I want to do. Like, this is what I'm exploring. I want to build something that feels like a match for me. And I need some support in excavating my strengths and the things that are unique to me so I can build something that's a match for that.
That is a really great way of looking at it, as in I need the support in order to make this change, because I think a lot of us just get overwhelmed with the idea of shifting and don't actually make the time available to really explore who we are and what we want to be doing. So it can take us a lot longer. Obviously, as a manifesting generator and, this real powerhouse CEO energy that you have, you weren't wasting any time though. You were just like, I'm doing this thing, I'm going to find answers, so I'm going to make it happen in whatever way is necessary. So when you got a look at when you started, I know you work with an astrologer quite closely. When you first kind of got a look at your chart, do you remember what was really kind of illuminating for you when you had your first, in-depth reading, or what really stood out to you that kind of shifted something in you for your business?
One of the things that's been really transformative for me, particularly over the past sort of 18 months, is this blend that two very different energies that exist in my astrology chart, which is this sort of, high-powered, dedicated CEO sort of energy, but also there's a lot in my chart that's very sort of feminine and sensitive and emotional. And for me, as someone who really only spent time, I came from, corporate career. I was a lawyer before I started my own business. I, have played professional sport. My husband was a professional athlete. I very much came from a lineage of doing and taking action. My parents were entrepreneurs. And so I had really only activated those parts of me, and my chart was this like high powered, let's do all the things kind of energy. And what I started to learn and what was really illuminating for me is, there's a reason why, I am, even though people sort of from a marketing perspective and people that watch me didn't really see this, what clients saw who were in like an intimate sort of space with me, and of course my, family and friends, but what they saw was, someone who is deeply sort of compassionate and caring and, really goes over and above for clients and has really intimate relationships and, is really focused on connection and people really feeling sort of seen and heard when they're in my space, which is really not what I was putting out from a marketing perspective. And that wasn't a bad thing. People were really attracted to this like high powered, like, I love all the things that you're doing and this is amazing. But what I've really lent into, especially this year, I would say, is blending both, and we can have both, we can be, like really high powered and really sort of high achieving and really ambitious. And we can also, be really sensitive and feel our feelings and, give ourselves the time and the space to sit with things and have both of those energies exist if that feels true for you, not sort of like, oh, well, she's doing it, so I'm going to do it. It's like whatever is true for you gets to be true for you, And so for me, that was huge, was seeing that, wow, like there's a reason why, I've always been really sort of particular about the people that I'm around in person. And I don't, my family always laughs that like I'm, get really funny about people that come into my home and, those kinds of things. And then I learnt so much more about what it means to be Cancerian and this sort of emotional, sort of inward side to me. And it's interesting because everyone just assumed that I was massively extroverted, but I'm more of an extroverted introvert, that was just something that people never really saw. And I'm really, glad and, some of the beautiful sort of reflections and feedback I've received now, especially recently, is like, I love this softening, I've loved watching this, and so I'm really glad that I explored it and that I also shared it too. And I wasn't sort of, oh, well, I've been doing it wrong this whole time. I could have really easily made it mean something about me, but I just chose to, well, I'm illuminating this and this feels new and exciting. And I'm excited to share this journey and this part to me that is now, being illuminated.
Yes, and that's something that's so interesting about people who have this sort of seesaw effect in their chart that you have. As I've said in previous episodes, your rising sign is how people see you. So, you can come across as this, very strong CEO energy, this very organized, this very action-taking kind of legacy-creating personality. But you have the sun in Cancer, as you said, and that is opposite the sign of Capricorn. So it's like this seesaw within you constantly of, wanting to be, the CEO and have that really kind of power-packed position, but also really loving your home and really being very focused on family and protecting your family and having that kind of emotional, sensitive side and communicating in an emotional way, because you also have Mercury in Cancer. So people with Mercury in Cancer naturally communicate in quite an emotional way. And someone with a Capricorn rising might have felt like that needed to be suppressed a little bit because it felt at odds with that more masculine CEO energy. Not that Capricorn is a masculine sign. It's actually a feminine sign, but because it can come across sometimes as that driving, pushing energy, that's where we get that masculine association with it. Like what I've loved about what's been happening in what I've noticed in your business lately is you've got this beautiful conjunction of Mars and Venus in the 8th house. And I look at things from a whole sign house perspective now. I used to use a different sign system, but now I use the whole sign house system. So for me, when I'm looking at your chart, I see Mars and Venus conjunct in Leo in the 8th house. And so that to me says you really, really value intimacy. Like it's really important to you and you need a business that has a very intimate connection with your clients, but also you need to be able to really express yourself because that's that Leo self-expression. And because Leo rules your midheaven, which is what you're publicly known for, this means that your public persona is like a work of art. So I've noticed this creation process in your business over the past couple of years where you've kind of changed your branding or like created this beautiful new space that feels like a work of art. Like everything is beautifully curated and is really kind of impactful now. And so that's where I think that you're really coming into your own in terms of using those gifts in your chart as well. I wanted to pick up as well on your mentioning of the moon and you didn't mention the moon, but you mentioned how you are with people in your home and being quite protective of it. And from my reading of your chart, you have the moon in the 12th house, which it's the house of hidden things. It's the place where we kind of retreat. So when you have the moon there, you can feel a lot like you need boundaries around particularly your home space. And with your moon in Sagittarius, so it's quite a kind of an extroverted moon, but it's quite a dramatic moon, but it's in a house that is very, very quiet. It's in a house that likes its privacy, that likes to be hidden and protected. So that can be where you get that feeling of being very protective about your home and people that come inside, and also very emotional as well, because that 12th house is a very watery energy. So, yeah, I love that you have witnessed all of these things in yourself and that they're all there in your chart as well. It's beautiful synchronicity. And I wanted to go a little bit further on this with you, as we talked about before we started recording. Because you're at that beautiful age where we go through what's known as the Saturn Return. And for anybody listening who doesn't know the Saturn Return, it is when we have a Saturn return to the place it was when we were born. And it is a moment of maturity. It's a big transit to navigate. It happens between the ages of 27 and 30. And so Jazz has just had her Saturn return last year. So I would love to know how you navigated your way through that significant transit and how knowing about it, because you obviously had an awareness of astrology at the time, how that changed, I guess, the way that you moved through it, if it changed the way you moved through it.
Well, last year I decided to do a half Ironman. So if that doesn't scream Saturn return, I don't know what does. But for me, yeah, look, the last sort of 18 months have been really huge, really, really huge for me. And I did know that this is something that I, was going through and experiencing. So I guess that just gave me, from the outset, I feel like that just gave me a lens of sort of compassion. It's like, I know that things are, potentially going to feel really tumultuous. And I also think as well, as a society and as a collective, everything was emotionally charged. The last couple of years have been total chaos for some people and completely out of the ordinary to what we have experienced in our lifetime. And so I sort of knew, going in, like this is going to probably feel really big and I don't know what's going to come of this. And so I think that was really important, just to know that, just to have the awareness and the knowledge that, this is a time, like you were saying, when we sort of go through this portal and things can potentially shift. So I think just knowing that really just, I think gave me a sense of sort of compassion and understanding. And, it's okay if things feel a little bit hard or if things feel a little bit confusing or if you're changing your mind. It's really standard for me also as a manifesting generator to be changing my mind fairly often. And so I just sort of, just let myself have that. In terms of how it actually, how it has played out for me, I think the biggest thing has been, these real opposing signs and just being able to hold both and being able to have like all of that at the table with me, like that none of it's wrong. It's just, this is what it is. And all of these parts of me get to be a part of my life and my business. And, you spoke about the creativity piece, and that's something that, I didn't really sort of prioritize as much in my business. Whereas these days, I have a graphic designer on retainer, and that's something that I never would have done or applied sort of like financial resources to earlier on in my business. But knowing that my creative expression is such a key part of, my natal chart, my human design, there's just lots of things that really point to that being key and being really important. That's now, an investment that I make in my business, because I see that as being really key for my life force energy, is that I feel like I can creatively express myself in the way that I, desire. So I feel like the biggest things that happened for me were this sort of like self-exploration really started to lead my life. Does this feel good for me? Does this style of launching, does this style of offer, like really just letting myself, sit with those questions before putting something out, which is kind of old Jazz was just like, yep, got this sacral response, let's just go. But really kind of applying this like extra lens to things. My creativity has just become so much more, like I really treat it with the same sort of respect and devotion as I do like a sales process. I see the creative process, the graphics, the things that I'm using, the way that I'm expressing an offer, the intention behind it as just as important as anything else that I'm doing in my business. And that certainly wasn't something that I was prioritizing pre sort of Saturn return and the last sort of 18 months of really, diving into this work. And I think as well, I'm really just owning the intimacy. I've been in business for a reasonable amount of time now, and I have a great community of clients and people that have been with me for an extended period of time. And it would be very easy for me, for example, as an example, to create something that is more evergreen and passive. And there is just not many cells in my body that feel excited about that. I really do value intimacy and connection. And, for a while I told myself, to scale and to do things, in the smartest way, like these, it should be evergreen, it should be passive, and just knowing actually that just doesn't, and it might feel okay for me in the future, but really just owning it and being like, you know what? Yeah, I could do things more evergreen and I could do things more passive, and I have a great team who can support me to do that. And I also want to prioritize intimacy and connection right now, and really just letting myself be okay with that and own that as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that, maybe the things that I do are a little bit, different to the way other people do things, or, the way mentors do things. And that's okay, because that's what makes me unique.
Yes, that is awesome. So in terms of your Saturn return, you have Saturn in Aquarius, and also Saturn is the ruler of your chart. So just to go a little astro here, a little more astro here, basically when you have a Capricorn rising, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is therefore the ruler of your chart. So when you have a Saturn return as someone who is ruled by Saturn, it can be a little more intense. And Saturn, in Jazze's case, is in the sign of Aquarius, which is what we're currently experiencing, this Saturn in Aquarius energy, which has been a little intense, as you said earlier, for most people since it moved in there right at the beginning of 2021. And you have a very early, you're only 5 degrees of Aquarius. So you got that really early in 2021. But the beauty of Saturn in Aquarius is that it is an off the beaten track original thinker. So when you have an experience like this, when you have your Saturn return, when Saturn is in Aquarius, it's going to bring you back to all of those themes around being original, being authentic, being authentically you in whatever way that is. So I think obviously your experience reflected that, you had to come back to what you really valued and what you wanted to do, and move away from, the way other people do it, and also create things that hadn't been out there before. I've seen some of your offers lately, and they're very unique and unusual. And I love that, because that is really strongly reflecting that unusual Saturn that rules your chart. So was there anything else that came through for you business-wise with that particular, that particular Saturn that came through in the past 18 months that surprised you a lot? Like, you've talked about sort of switching things up quite a lot in your business, but was there something in particular that came through where you were like, this is really strange, but I'm just going to go with it anyway?
I think something that I have found a little bit challenging particularly this year, and I think it really started to kick off last year, around the time of my Saturn return, is, I am obviously someone who's I'm in the coaching space, and I have had a real sort of battle with being in the coaching space, right? Like, my place in the coaching space, the things that I see in the coaching space, there's so much that I don't love. And there's so many things that I just am not on board with, in the way that we market things, this emphasis on, just money and luxury and hustle. I've really, really struggled with that. And this is something that, really I didn't really pay much attention to be quite honest. Over the past few years, it's just, I've sort of seen it happen. I'm just sort of, I guess I've been very neutral. I'm over here doing my thing, working on my business kind of vibes. And then there was rumblings. There was rumblings under the surface last year. And then this year it really started to be illuminated as, I guess alongside a lot of this self-exploration work. It's what is my role? And what is my purpose in this space, and is this a place I want to be long term? How do I feel about being in this space? And that was really unexpected because, I've worked really hard in my business and I didn't put anything out for the first 3 months of 2022, which is really unusual for me. Like I am someone that is kind of always doing something. It feels really energetically aligned for me to be always sort of working on something. And I scrap launches, I put off things. I was like, no, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel ready. I feel like there's a lot more that I need to move through. And that was a really hard quarter, Q1 of this year. It was the lowest income quarter that we've had for a couple of years. I was just really questioning a lot of things. And so that's something that I don't talk about as often online, but was really needed. Like I needed to be in that portal. I needed to be in the crunchiness. I needed to be in that space of like really questioning for me to just decide, actually, I am needed. Like I am really, really needed in this space because we are not paying enough attention to building a business that is sustainable and is a reflection of ourselves. We're so freaking obsessed with like creating 100K a month that all the other stuff is just going out the window, the stuff that actually matters, our joy and our abundance and our alignment. And so I really felt, I needed to go through that. I needed to question myself and I needed to question everything in order for me to decide, actually, I am needed now more than ever.
Those are such Saturn Return questions to be asking yourself too. Like, what am I doing for the long term? What am I here to create? Where do I stand on all of these things? Yeah, that's just such a powerful experience to have and to move through. And a lot of us don't actually navigate that in our businesses because we might come to them later in life. And so I think it's just such a gift that you have been able to go through that while running your own business and watching yourself so closely throughout that process and really deciding what feels aligned and what doesn't. Because, yeah, if you're working for someone else, it's very difficult for you to shift and change. Whereas when you're working for yourself, it becomes like, well, why would I keep doing this thing if this thing is no longer connecting with who I am and what I want to be known for? So yes, such an awesome experience. Do you think you would be where you are today in business if you didn't know these things about yourself? If you didn't know, your astrology chart, if you didn't know human design, if you hadn't gone through that kind of self-healing journey, do you think you'd be where you are today, or would you be somewhere very different?
No, I think I'd be somewhere very different. And, I'm not someone that, you probably already know this about me. Like, I'm not someone that sort of lives with regret or is like, oh, I should have done this thing or I should have done that or anything like that. I just believe that everything happens the way that it's meant to. And I don't believe that we fail. We either, it either works out the way that we want it to or better, or it doesn't. And there's opportunities for us to, learn. So that's very much how I, feel. So if I hadn't have gone through this, that path would have been correct for me. But I am also very grateful for the path that I am on right now because, I think that it would have been very easy for me to go the opposite direction too. Like we created a really successful business really fast. Even before I sort of moved into coaching and I was focused on network marketing, we had a 6-figure business in sort of 8 months, and within sort of 13 or 14 months, it was a multiple 6-figure business. We moved really fast, and not everyone would have sort of stopped that, I guess, and been like, actually, is this something that I want to do? Because on paper, it was really, really successful. Like my bank account loved it, and my family, like it was great, and so how do you walk away from something like that, and decide, actually, this doesn't feel good to me and I want to change things? That's a really scary thing. At the time, my husband had retired, and so he was a professional athlete and he'd retired. He hadn't gone into another job. And so, I was providing for our family. And so to just decide, actually, this doesn't feel good and I want to change things up, like that was a really big decision to make and took a lot of courage and self-trust there. And so I am really grateful for, human design and astrology and just a lot of the healing that I've done, because I know that the impact I'm able to have and am having with, in my own life and with my clients is phenomenal, and I went to Melbourne for a few days on the weekend, and we used to live there, and I loved living there, and I love Melbourne, and I came home being like, wow, the energy of of Melbourne was so hectic, you know, for me to kind of go back into. And it was a real moment for me to be like, you've done so much work to live more in alignment and to live, you know, a slower, more easeful, more conscious life. And it was a real kind of, you know, experience. Like, it was just a really beautiful moment for me to be like, I never experienced this when I lived here. Like, I never noticed all of the things that I'm now noticing. And it's because I'm more present and it's because I'm more me. And that's nothing against Melbourne. I absolutely love Melbourne, but it was just a really great moment for me to be like, you know, you are doing exactly what you want to be doing and you are moving so much more in alignment than you ever have been. And what a freaking gift. Like, isn't that the whole point of life? Really?
Yes, I love that. That is the point, right? And that is, I think, something that we can struggle with a lot if we don't actually go through that introspective process and actually work out what we want as opposed to what we've been conditioned to want or what other people want for us or what we thought we wanted, because it changes, right? It's constantly kind of evolving. And yeah, I think it's such a great moment when you can step outside yourself and say, oh yeah, I couldn't have had the life that I have now if I had, you know, I wouldn't have that life if I was in Melbourne, for instance, or this is the life that I'm supposed to have. That's a great realization to have. So I love that for you. So what is happening now in terms of your business, your marketing, your offers? What are you creating that feels really good and really closely aligned with your, you know, all of that expressive, creative expression? You talked a little bit about your having graphic designer and retainer, which I love for you. What is happening in terms of your offers that's really shifted this year?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I had sort of started doing to probably sort of the middle of last year, so over a year ago now, right at that sort of Saturn Return time, is I started to really utilize all of the magnificent sort of coaches and people that I have worked with. You know, being someone who is very multi-passionate, very multi-dimensional, I've worked with so many different mentors and healers, and I wasn't really offering that to my clients or the spaces that I was creating. And so I started to shift into much more of an opportunity for clients to come in and, yes, get this, you know, the strategic and energetic support in their business, but also for them to receive, you know, for them to be exposed to different kinds of like healing, you know, sort of mentors. You know, we have like a nervous system practitioner. We've had, you know, breath work sessions, you know, and all the way to kind of more, you know, copywriting work, right? Which is the work that you do and things like that. And I, you know, being someone who's been very multi-passionate, I've worked with lots of different mentors. And so I really just decided, well, it makes sense for me to leverage that, you know, and for me to support clients in this same way, because I also attract a lot of clients who are very, very multidimensional. I attract a lot of manifesting generators, you know, people that do have a lot of this like duality, that are really sort of ambitious and high powered, but are also, you know, really craving like presence and slowness and ease. And so it makes so much sense for me to provide that experience for clients, that they get this sort of strategic support, but also, you know, I can organize a call with, you know, my energy coach, or, you know, an intuitive guidance reading with one of my best friends who's a psychic medium, you know, like I can do all of that and support them in a very multidimensional way. So I kind of started to really own more of that in my work. And I have, you know, a full sort of 12-month creative experience that is focused on self-exploration, you know, and self-discovery. That includes, you know, human design, astrology, creativity, you know, it's all the parts from, I guess, like having an idea for something all the way to selling it and then delivering it, you know. So for me, like that is, you know, this program Neon is, I guess, it really just epitomizes my, you know, the work that I've done, and, you know, all of the things that astrology and human design and things like that has really illuminated for me. It's an opportunity for people to do the same, for people to build a business that feels really in alignment with their own, you know, natal chart, you know, their human design, their own, you know, version of, you know, what creativity looks like for them. And, this is an offer that I sort of had an idea for last year, but it was very different. It was more so just, 12 months, you get access to, whatever programs I run in those 12 months. And there was just something within me that was like, nah, it's not right. Like it's not ready. This is not the version that it's going to be when it is, launched and delivered. And I sat on this offer for, I think, about 6 or 7 months, and I didn't launch it. And that's so not like me ever. And I just knew. I was like, no, it's not right. And then I had this just moment where I was having actually a conversation with Hannah, one of my friends who's an astrologer and a psychic medium. And we were talking about some upcoming transits in my chart. And I said, I really want to do a launch in June of my birthday because that's also the solstice. And, again, I've Cancerian and Capricorn opposing signs. And, the solstice is when we, have, one half of the world is, in more darkness, and one half of the world is, the lightest that it will be. And I just, I was really feeling into that. And this conversation stemmed this reimagining of Neon and this program. And it's what led to it becoming focused on self-exploration and self-discovery and human design and astrology and, the nervous system and energetics. And it really just feels like a real culmination of my work that I know would never have been birthed in this way had I not, really committed myself to learning more about this over the past couple of years.
Yes, that is so good that you just sat with it until it was ready as well, and that is an unusual thing to do, right? In this online world, not just for you, but I think for most people in this very fast-paced online business world, we're always kind of rushing to put out the next thing. And then if we don't let it sit for a while, it's not fully formed and it's not as good as it could be. And I love that you sat with it until you were ready and then unleashed it to the world in such a beautiful, authentic way and, really aligned it with what you had done. That is, I'm sure, going to be a really epic program. I'm sure it started already, I think. But it sounds like an absolutely brilliant exploration and moving people forward in that authentic way to them, as opposed to moving people forward in the more traditional or masculine way of just follow this plan, just do this thing the way I've done it before. Actually uncover yourself and do it the way that you want to do it is a very unusual take on a business program. So I love it. And I briefly touched on earlier, the marketing for that program I thought was so beautiful. It's so expressive, so, different as well. And I think that's just a great reflection of you really tapping into that Mars and Venus in Leo. And also this idea of, the eighth house, with those planets in the eighth house, you have this real desire or value of intimacy, but also you've got Jupiter there. So it's you really want to bring focus and expand on those taboo or those areas that, that self-exploration, that psychology, wherever you can, how people can uncover more about themselves. That's a very eighth house kind of area as well. So I love that you're bringing it all together in this new program and doing it in such an expressive neon way. So cool.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything you want to leave people with before we close out today's episode?
I think just if you are feeling the niggle, if there's parts of your business that feel a little bit crunchy, you don't need to burn it all down, on day one, if it's just there and you can feel it, just follow that. And like I said, doesn't mean you have to change everything on day one. I didn't change everything on day one, but, I really let myself follow that. And I let myself, feel question things and get really curious about, is this something that I want to do? Is this particular offer that I'm doing right now, does that feel good long term for me? Does it feel like a match for me? I guess I just stayed open. Who can I work with or follow or get in my circle that is already, living a life that feels really driven by self-exploration and self-discovery and who is talking about astrology and who is talking about the nervous system, who is talking about building something that feels like a match. And I think it can feel really scary because, we've been used to doing things one way, and don't let that take away from the curiosity, because it doesn't need to feel hard. It can actually feel really exciting, and it can feel like, oh, this is so full of possibility. So yeah, just thought I would leave you with that little nugget.
So good. All right. Thank you so much, Jazz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on the Cosmic Business Breakthrough. If you'd like to learn more about what I do, head to sophiapalace.com or follow me at Sophia Palace over on Instagram. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd love for you to take a moment and review the show if you found it helpful and share it with a few friends. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.